Hello everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I have always loved my job as a graphic designer. I'm passionate about being able to create new things every day. My office is small and quiet, the perfect place to focus on my projects. Normally, I spend most of the day working on designs for my clients, taking care of every detail until everything looks exactly the way I imagined. I feel a great pride in what I do, and even though it can be exhausting at times, I always end the day with a sense of satisfaction. But something changed in me after what happened one night when I was returning from work. It was an experience that stayed etched in my memory forever. It was a Friday afternoon and I was already looking forward to the weekend. I left the office around 7 p.m., a little later than usual, although it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. The sun had just set and the sky was tinted with orange and violet tones. As I drove back home, I thought about what I would do over the weekend. Maybe I would watch some movies, order delivery, and simply relax. When I arrived, I parked the car in the driveway and walked toward the door. My house is a single-story home, small but with just the right amount of space for me. I've lived alone here for 3 years. It's not in a very busy area, which I like, because it's quiet and I always find peace after a long day at work. I put the key in the lock and opened the door. The house was completely dark, just as I expected. I turned on the hallway light and took off my shoes, enjoying the feeling of finally being home. The familiar scent of the place wrapped around me, bringing me a sense of calm. I left my bag on the living room sofa and headed toward the kitchen to get something. But then something caught my attention. There was a dim light coming from there. At first I thought it might be the reflection of the street lights outside, but it was too bright for that. I clearly remembered turning off all the lights before leaving that morning, so it didn't make sense. A slight discomfort ran through my body, although I tried to downplay it. Maybe I had simply forgotten to turn the light off. It had been a long day, after all. However, as I got closer to the kitchen, that feeling of unease grew stronger. The light wasn't coming from the ceiling, but from the refrigerator area. I entered slowly, with soft steps on the floor. The source of the glow was the freezer door, which was completely open. My heart began to pound. I was sure I had closed it. Who would leave a freezer open? I didn't live with anyone, and only I had the keys to the house. Suddenly, the home's comforting silence turned unsettling. I moved a little closer, and that was when I saw him. In front of the freezer there was a man. He had his back to me, motionless, with his head slightly tilted forward. He was wearing dark, dirty clothes, and he had his hands inside the freezer, as if he were searching for something among the compartments. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. I was completely paralyzed, unable to move or make a sound. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How was it possible that someone was inside my house? My mind began to fill with questions, but there was no time to think. Without making a sound, I started to back away slowly, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The man didn't seem to have noticed my presence, and I didn't want to take any risks. My hands were trembling as I tiptoed toward the hallway. I went straight to my bedroom, trying to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. Once inside, I locked the door and pressed my back against it, shaking as I turned the key in the lock. I stayed that way for a few seconds, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my head. How had he gotten in? Why was he rummaging through my freezer? Nothing made sense, but I couldn't stay frozen. I had to act. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it with trembling hands and dialed 911. My voice broke as I explained the situation to the operator. The minutes that followed felt endless as I waited for the police to arrive. I turned off the lights in my room, afraid that any movement might give me away. I didn't know whether the man was still in the kitchen or if he had heard me. Every creak of the house made me jump. The silence was oppressive, and each passing second grew heavier with tension. I tried to listen for any sound, but the only thing I could perceive was the rapid rhythm of my own heart. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I felt a mix of relief and fear. What if the intruder heard them too? What if he tried to escape or come toward me? My mind couldn't stop imagining the worst-case scenarios. Finally, I heard the sharp thud of the front door being forced open. Then, firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. The police had arrived. I unlocked my bedroom door and opened it slowly, peeking out cautiously. I saw a flashlight beam sweep across the walls as the officers inspected every corner. I stepped out, feeling a wave of relief. "I'm here," I said, my voice trembling. The officers came over right away, asking if I was okay and whether I had seen the intruder. I told them everything: the light in the kitchen, the man in front of the freezer, and how I had hidden. They searched the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find anyone. The man had vanished. There were no signs that anyone had been there, no footprints, no items out of place, nothing. One of the officers told me it wasn't unusual for burglars to break in looking for easy targets, but something about that explanation didn't add up. Why was he so interested in my freezer? Why didn't he take anything? I had no answers, only a feeling of confusion and fear that stayed with me long after that night. The next day, I installed security cameras all over the house and changed the locks. I wanted to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. But despite all the precautions, the fear didn't go away. From that night on, every time I came back from work, a sense of unease followed me. Opening the door was no longer synonymous with rest or tranquility. I was always invaded by the doubt. Would there be someone waiting for me inside? The peace I used to find in the silence of my home disappeared. Now that same silence felt heavy, oppressive, full of memories of what had happened. Every creak of the floor, every shadow reflected on the wall made me startle. I knew it was irrational, that the man probably wouldn't come back, but I couldn't help it. Fear had settled into me like an invisible guest. I never saw the intruder again. The police couldn't find him and the case went cold over time. But for me, there was no closure, no forgetting. The uncertainty about who he was, how he got in, or what he was looking for still haunts me to this day. Sometimes, I still wonder what exactly he was doing in front of my freezer, as if I had hidden something important there for him, or for me. I still love my work. I'm still passionate about designing and creating, but coming home is no longer the same. The place that once represented safety and peace became a constant source of anxiety. What was once my refuge is now marked by the memory of an unknown presence. Since that night, the feeling of being completely safe has disappeared forever, replaced by a persistent fear, the silent fear of the unknown. Story 2. That night I was working late at the office, something that had already become routine for me. My name is James and I'm an accountant at a small firm. The place used to be completely silent at that hour, interrupted only by the constant sound of my fingers tapping on the keyboard. The ceiling lights cast long shadows that made everything feel even more desolate. It was the kind of silence in which any noise, no matter how insignificant, seemed amplified. The hum of the air conditioner, the creak of the old wooden floor. Everything took on an unsettling presence. It was Thursday night and I had a deadline to meet. My coworkers had left hours ago, leaving me as the only one in the office. I focused on my work, determined to finish it so I could finally go home. The wall clock read 11:45 p.m., and I was starting to feel the day's accumulated fatigue. My eyes felt heavy and my back hurt from so many hours sitting down. Suddenly, something moved at the edge of my vision. A small flash, a barely perceptible movement. I lifted my head, but when I looked around, I didn't see anything. I thought maybe my tired mind was playing tricks on me, so I focused back on the screen. However, that feeling that something wasn't right didn't go away. The air felt thicker, and the silence much more oppressive. I tried to shake off the discomfort, telling myself it was just exhaustion or how late it was. 15 minutes later, when I was already considering calling it a night, I heard a noise on the other side of the office door. At first it was barely a murmur, like a brush or a soft movement. But then it became clearer, like footsteps. My heart lurched. I stayed still, listening carefully. The most logical idea was that one of my coworkers had come back to pick up something they had forgotten. But who would return to the office at almost midnight? I stood up slowly, with measured movements, and approached the door. I pressed my ear to the cold surface. The footsteps had stopped. Only silence remained. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to open the door and check what was happening, but another part wanted to simply grab my things and leave. Curiosity ended up winning. I reached my hand toward the doorknob and, at that exact moment, a loud bang echoed, followed by a shout that left me frozen. "Hands up," ordered a firm, authoritative voice. I recognized the tone instantly. It was the police. My heart started pounding uncontrollably, and an avalanche of thoughts raced through my mind. Why were the police there? What had happened? With my breath catching, I slowly turned the doorknob and opened the door carefully. In front of me were two officers with their guns drawn, pointing directly in my direction. The sight chilled my blood. I raised my hands immediately, without thinking, while a mix of fear and confusion ran through my body. "What's going on?" I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "Are you alone?" one of the officers asked, his eyes scanning the inside of the office behind me. Yes, I'm alone," I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. But they didn't lower their guns. One of the officers stepped forward and motioned for me to move out of the way. "Don't move," he ordered firmly. "We received a report of a break-in." I felt the blood drain from my face. A break-in? Here. I looked around, expecting to see something out of place, a broken window or open drawers. But everything was the same as before, just the usual mess of papers, folders, and office supplies. "I didn't hear anything," I said, trying to understand what was happening. Could it be that someone had come in without me noticing? I had been so focused on my work that anything could have happened without me realizing it. "We saw a man enter the building," the other officer explained, his voice low and controlled. "We followed him to this area." A chill ran through me from head to toe. I had been there the whole time, without knowing someone else was there too. I stepped aside, allowing the police to come in. They moved with precision, checking every corner of the office. One of them crouched behind my desk while the other headed toward the small storage room in the back. I remained standing by the door, my hands still raised, not daring to move. I felt like a spectator inside a nightmare, watching everything without being able to intervene. "Stay calm," one of the officers said as he continued searching. "We'll find him." The minutes passed slowly, suffocatingly. The sound of drawers opening and footsteps echoing on the wooden floor made my anxiety increase. I couldn't stop thinking about how close that intruder might be. What if he had been watching me the whole time, while I worked without realizing it? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard one of the officers' voice charged with tension. "Here," he shouted from the back of the office. The other officer ran toward him, and I held my breath. I saw him crouch down, looking under one of the desks in the back. The silence became unbearable. Then I saw it. A shadow moved under the desk. My stomach turned as I understood what it meant. The intruder had been there, hidden the whole time. "Come out slowly," one of the officers ordered in a firm voice, the gun still aimed at the desk. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension. Then, slowly, a figure began to crawl out from under the desk. It was a man. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hair matted, and his face pale, gaunt, as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wide open, bulging, filled with a mixture of fear and emptiness. The officers grabbed him quickly, pulled him to his feet, and put him in handcuffs. I stood there, completely paralyzed, watching the scene without being able to process what I was seeing. The intruder didn't say a single word. He stared straight ahead, expressionless, as they escorted him out of the office. Everything felt unreal, like I was watching a movie. Except this time I was inside it. When they finally took him away, silence took over the place again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, darker, loaded with a sense of invisible threat. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling, trying to process what had just happened. I looked around and everything seemed different. The office, that place where I had spent so many nights working, no longer felt familiar. It was as if the shadows had come to life and had swallowed the sense of safety I used to feel there. I couldn't keep working. I couldn't even focus. The simple fact of staying one more minute in that place felt unbearable. I grabbed my things in a rush, shut down the computer, and left. The cold night air hit my face when I walked out of the building's door. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. But the fear persisted. Every noise, every shadow on the street made me turn my head. That night completely changed the way I saw my work. I could no longer stay late at the office. The idea of being alone there, with the possibility that someone could be hiding again, gave me chills. To this day, I can't stop thinking about it. What if the police hadn't arrived in time? What would have happened if that man had decided to come out of his hiding place while I kept working, completely unaware of his presence? That question still haunts me, and even though I try to go on with my life, every time the clock strikes midnight and silence takes over the room, I can't help but look around, just to make sure no one is there watching me. Before moving on to the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to receive the next scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 3. I have always loved traveling, and Airbnb is my favorite platform for finding unique places to stay. One summer I felt the need to get away from the noise of the city, so I booked a small cabin in the middle of the forest. The photos on the site showed a cozy wooden house surrounded by tall trees, and the reviews were excellent. Everyone praised the owner, a man named Mr. Bolt, for his kindness and willingness to help. I didn't think twice before making the reservation. The trip to the cabin was longer than I had anticipated. The road became narrower and more winding as I went on. The trees rose on both sides, so tall that their branches seemed to stretch like fingers interlacing above me. Sunlight barely managed to filter through the thick foliage, tinting the road with a greenish, gloomy tone. I could feel the air growing cooler little by little, and a sense of isolation began to settle in my chest. Even so, I kept telling myself that this peace was exactly what I was looking for. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked identical to the photographs. Charming, with a small porch and a rocking chair in front of the door. Some flowers grew in neat rows next to the steps, adding a touch of color to that otherwise gloomy setting. I parked the car, got out, and stretched my legs after the long trip. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a fresh, natural fragrance. Suddenly, Mr. Bolt appeared from behind the cabin. He was an older man, in his 50s, with a kind smile and warm eyes. He wore a plaid shirt, jeans, and a fairly worn straw hat. He greeted me enthusiastically and helped me with my luggage. "You'll love this place," he told me in a calm voice, as soft as the whisper of leaves moved by the wind. He showed me the inside, a small kitchen, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a bedroom with a large window that offered an impressive view of the forest. Everything was simple, but very comfortable, just what I needed. Before leaving, he assured me that he lived nearby and that I could call him if I needed anything. I thanked him for his kindness and felt reassured by how cordial he was. That first night was quiet and beautiful. I made a cup of tea and sat on the porch to watch the sunset. The forest remained silent, broken only by the occasional song of a bird or the soft rustle of leaves. When night fell, the air became colder and the sky took on a deep dark blue shade. I lit the fire in the fireplace and curled up with a book. The warmth of the flames and the crackle of the fire made me feel protected, comfortable. But as the night went on, I began to notice things that didn't let me rest easy. The cabin creaked, groaning with sounds that seemed like sighs. The wind howled outside, making the windows vibrate. The shadows danced on the walls in rhythm with the fire, and although I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, something in the atmosphere felt unsettling. The next morning I got up early, determined to explore the surroundings. The forest was dense, with trees so tall and leafy that they barely let sunlight through. I followed a narrow trail that ran between the trunks, and the ground sank softly under my feet, covered by a thick layer of dry leaves. The only sound that broke the silence was the crunch of leaves with each step I took. I didn't run into anyone during the entire walk, which didn't surprise me given how isolated the place was. However, there was something different in the atmosphere that morning. The silence, which the night before had seemed peaceful, now felt oppressive, almost heavy. An uncomfortable feeling began to grow in me, as if someone were watching me from somewhere among the trees. I turned around several times, convinced I would see someone behind me, but there was no one. Even so, the uneasiness wouldn't go away. The forest, so beautiful and serene, had taken on a disturbing air, as if it were hiding something beneath its apparent calm. When I returned to the cabin, Mr. Bolt was there, crouched by the porch, tending to the flowers growing out front. He greeted me with the same kind smile as the night before, but this time something in his gaze made me hesitate. His eyes, once warm, now looked darker, with a strange intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried not to think much of it, convincing myself it was only my imagination, fueled by the solitude of the place. That afternoon I decided to stay in the cabin. I lit the fireplace again and poured myself a hot drink. Trying to relax, the firelight cast uneasy shadows on the walls, but I tried to focus on the comforting sound of the crackling. Then I heard something outside. It was a soft sound, almost imperceptible at first, as if something were moving through the leaves. I turned off the music and held my breath to listen more closely. The noise became clearer, closer, until it seemed to come from just the other side of the door. My heart jumped. I waited in silence, not daring to move. Several endless seconds passed, and then, nothing. Everything went still again. I tried to convince myself it must have been an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, and I forced myself not to think about it anymore. Even so, the knot in my stomach didn't go away. I went to bed trying to ignore that persistent feeling that something wasn't right. But in the middle of the night, a new sound woke me up. They were footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, moving down the cabin's hallway, coming closer and closer to my room. Fear paralyzed me. I could hear the creak of the boards beneath someone's feet. The doorknob began to turn slowly, and the door opened with a long, soft creak. In the doorway, barely lit by the pale light filtering in through the window, stood Mr. Bolt. There he was, standing in the darkness, Mr. Bolt. But he was not the same kind man who had welcomed me the day before. His eyes no longer showed that warmth that inspired trust. Now they were cold, empty, and terrifying. His face seemed split into two opposite expressions. On one side, the gentle smile I remembered, and on the other, a twisted grimace, charged with rage and something I couldn't define. It was as if two different people were fighting to take control of his body. I felt fear tighten around my chest. I was trapped in the middle of the forest, alone, with no way to escape. Mr. Bolt didn't say a single word. He stood motionless in the doorway, staring at me, breathing slowly but heavily. I couldn't move. My mind desperately searched for a way to react, to run, to defend myself, but my muscles wouldn't respond. Seconds that felt like hours passed, and finally, without any explanation, he turned around. He left the room and his footsteps faded down the hallway until they disappeared. I remained silent, holding my breath, not daring to move even an inch. I waited. 1, 2, 3 endless minutes, until I finally gathered the courage to grab my phone. With trembling hands, I dialed the police and told them what had happened, trying to stay calm. My voice broke as I gave the address and begged them to come quickly. Despite how remote the place was, the officers arrived surprisingly fast. When they entered the cabin, I was still in the bedroom, frozen. They spread out across the property and, after a few minutes, found Mr. Bolt hidden among the trees not far from there. When they arrested him, they discovered something that chilled my blood. That man had a history of mental disorders and had spent years living in the forest, pretending to be different people. The kind and helpful Mr. Bolt was only one of his personalities. The other, the one I saw that night, was something much darker and more dangerous. I left the cabin at dawn. I drove along the narrow, winding road, leaving the trees and the forest silence behind. But the fear stayed with me. Even though the danger was behind me, the sense of horror persisted. Sometimes I still remember that face, that half kind and human, and the other half deformed, consumed by something uncontrollable. And I will never be able to forget the exact moment when I understood that the man who seemed so kind was hiding something truly terrifying inside him. Story 4. A few weeks ago, I decided to go camping alone in a remote forest. I had been working non-stop and I needed to unplug, clear my mind, and breathe fresh air. The idea of being surrounded by nature, far away from everything and everyone, felt comforting. I packed my gear, got my backpack ready, and drove to a forest a friend had told me about. It was very far from the city and few people knew about it, which made it the perfect place to find some peace. When I arrived, the sun was still high in the sky. The trees were imposing, thick and tall, forming a kind of green ceiling over my head. The air was cool, and I could hear birds singing in the distance. There was a small stream nearby, and the murmur of water sliding over the rocks created a calm melody that filled the air. I found an ideal clearing to camp in, right next to the stream and surrounded by tall pines. I set up my tent, started a small campfire, and sat down to enjoy the scenery. The sun began to set slowly, painting the sky in orange and pink tones as the temperature dropped. I stoked the fire and made a simple dinner, enjoying the warmth of the flames crackling in front of me. Night fell, and the sky filled with bright stars peeking between the treetops. It was a perfect night, serene, and I felt at peace with myself and with the world. After dinner, I stayed by the fire a little longer, listening to the sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves moved by the wind, and the occasional noise of a small animal in the bushes. Everything seemed calm, exactly as I had imagined. Finally, I decided to go to sleep. I put out the fire and climbed into the tent and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. The night was cool, but inside the tent I was comfortable and warm. I closed my eyes, enjoying the silence and the solitude. I don't know how long I slept, but around midnight I jolted awake. I had heard something. Voices. At first I thought I was dreaming, but I soon realized they were real. My heart started pounding as I stayed still, holding my breath. I could clearly hear two men talking right outside my tent. "Are you sure this is the place?" one of them asked with a deep, harsh voice. "Yes, I saw him set up his camp here earlier," the other replied in a lower tone, almost nervous. A cold sweat ran across my forehead. Who were they? What were they doing there? The forest was completely isolated. There was no one else for miles. I stayed absolutely still, afraid to make the slightest sound. The voices continued, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Look, I think we should kill him," the first one said in a cold voice, without any emotion. "That will make it easier. No one is going to find him in a place like this." I felt my heart stop. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Were they talking about me? Fear paralyzed me. My mind filled with frantic thoughts. Should I run? Hide? Try to scare them off? But what if they were armed? What if they caught up to me? The forest was huge, and the total darkness offered me no safe refuge. Then the other man spoke in a firm voice. "No, tonight we're not going to kill anyone. Let's look for someone else. Someone easier. Leave him." There was a long silence. I barely dared to breathe. I could hear the sound of my own heart pounding inside my chest. Finally, the first one replied with a frustrated grunt. "Fine, but if we don't find anyone else, we'll come back." Their footsteps began to move away, crunching over the dry leaves until they finally faded into the distance. I didn't move. I stayed completely still inside the tent, listening, trembling, waiting. The minutes passed slowly, endlessly. Every sound in the forest made me jump. The murmur of the stream, the wind in the branches, the crickets. I didn't sleep for a single second after that. I sat there with the flashlight off, listening and replaying those men's words over and over again. "If we don't find anyone else, we'll come back." That sentence echoed in my head like a constant refrain. When the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, I didn't wait another second. I packed everything as fast as I could, not worrying about order or properly breaking down the campsite. I just wanted to get out of there. The forest, which had seemed beautiful and peaceful the afternoon before, now looked hostile. The trees, once majestic, now gave me the impression of closing in around me, hiding 1,000 invisible eyes watching me. Every crack, every shadow made me turn around. I felt like at any moment those men would appear again between the trunks. When I finally reached my car, I threw my gear into the back, got in, and started the engine with trembling hands. I didn't breathe easy until I was miles away, back on the main road. Only then did I allow myself to exhale, but the fear didn't leave. The memory of those voices stayed with me, repeating over and over in my mind. Camping alone had always been something I loved, a way to escape the noise and find myself. But after that night, I'm not sure I can do it again. Story 5. The carnival was always my refuge, my escape from the everyday world. I was just a child when I started working there, in that place full of colors, lights, and joy. The music blared loudly, blending with laughter, the hum of the rides, and the sweet smell of cotton candy that floated in the air. The sun was slowly going down, painting the sky with pink and orange tones that made the carnival lights shine even brighter. I worked at the game booths, where people lined up to try their luck. My job was simple: hand out prizes, collect tickets, and sometimes show customers how to play. The games were always the same: tossing rings, shooting basketballs, knocking down bottles. But what made it special were the expressions of those who won. Seeing their eyes light up when they got a teddy bear or a shiny toy filled me with satisfaction. I felt like I was part of something magical. However, as the night went on, the carnival began to change. The cheerful yet noisy atmosphere took on a different, stranger tone. The shadows stretched longer. The sounds grew more muted, turning the bustle into a distant murmur. People kept laughing and enjoying themselves, but something had changed. It was as if the carnival had two faces, one bright, cheerful, and colorful during the day, and another dark, unsettling, and mysterious when night fell. It was a night like that, already quite late, when I saw him for the first time. He was standing at the edge of the carnival, just beyond the circle of lights. He was a tall, thin man, with his face hidden in the shadows. He wasn't taking part in anything. He wasn't playing. He wasn't going on the rides. And he wasn't talking to anyone. He was just there, still, watching. At first I tried not to think much of it. After all, a lot of people came to the carnival for different reasons. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, or simply enjoying watching. But as the night went on, I kept seeing him. No matter where I was in the carnival, at the ring toss booth, helping a child at the shooting gallery, or resting near the food stands, I felt his gaze fixed on me. It was as if he didn't look away for a single second. I began to feel a growing discomfort. Every time I spotted him in the shadows, a wave of chills ran across my skin. He stayed there, in silence, without moving, always watching. I couldn't help feeling that he was there for me, that he was following me. As the hours passed and the carnival began to close, the lights went out one by one, the music faded, and the crowd dispersed. The cheerful bustle was replaced by a strange, almost unnatural silence. I put away the booth's things with trembling hands. In the distance, I could still see him, motionless, standing right at the edge where the light stopped reaching. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I tried to focus on my task, wanting to finish as soon as possible and leave. When I finally closed up the booth, I hurried toward the exit. But before I left, I turned one last time. The man was no longer there. A sense of relief washed over me. I sighed, convinced that everything had been a misunderstanding, until I turned forward, and then I saw him. He was right in front of me, just a few steps away. His face was still hidden by shadow, but I could feel his eyes locked on me, cold and unmoving. My heart started pounding violently. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if they were made of lead. I stood completely frozen as he moved slowly toward me. Every step he took seemed calculated, deliberate, as if he enjoyed stretching out the moment. He didn't say anything, and I couldn't move a single muscle either. Fear had frozen me. Finally, my body reacted. Without looking back, I turned around and ran with all my strength. I didn't want to know if he was following me. I didn't want to see him again. The carnival was almost empty now. The lights out, the games covered with tarps. All I could hear was the echo of my hurried footsteps and my ragged breathing. When I finally reached the main road, the carnival lights looked small and distant behind me. I stopped to catch my breath, my heart pounding furiously in my chest. I was safe, at least. That's what I wanted to believe. But the fear was still there, persistent, lodged deep inside me. My hands were shaking. My stomach ached with nerves. I walked back home under the darkest night I could remember. Every sound made me jump. The snap of a branch, the gust of wind, the distant bark of a dog. Every shadow seemed to be hiding something. I kept turning my head, convinced that at any moment I would see him again, following me. But the road was empty, completely empty. When I got home, I locked the door, and then checked it again and again, making sure it was properly closed. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to sound crazy or admit that I had been so terrified by a man who, maybe, was just another carnival visitor. But deep down I knew he wasn't. I knew that man didn't belong to that colorful, joyful world. He was something different, something that shouldn't have been there. The next day I went back to work, trying to act normal. But nothing felt the same. The colors seemed less bright, the music less cheerful, and the shadows much deeper. I kept looking toward the edge of the carnival, expecting to see him again, but he never appeared. A few days later, the carnival moved to another city, and I went with it. I never saw that man again. Even so, years have passed, and every time I think about that night, I can still feel his fixed stare, cold and unblinking, following me through the carnival's shadows. I never told anyone. Some things are better left unsaid. Story 6. In the year 2019, my grandmother became seriously ill. She had always been a strong woman, full of life and energy, but suddenly her health began to deteriorate. The doctors were clear. She might not recover. It was a very hard blow for the whole family. We loved her deeply, and the idea of losing her was something none of us could bear. One night, my parents decided to go to the hospital to visit her. She was getting worse, and they wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. They asked me if I wanted to go with them. But the truth is, I was afraid to see her like that. So fragile. I told them I preferred to stay home. They didn't insist. They knew how much the situation was affecting me. Before leaving, my mother hugged me tightly and said, "Make sure you lock all the doors and windows properly. We'll be back soon. Call us if you need anything." I nodded and watched them leave. As soon as the car drove away down the street, the house was wrapped in a strange, dense silence, almost unnatural. It wasn't an ordinary silence, but one that made every creak, every small sound, stand out. I felt a slight shiver, but I tried to calm myself down. I turned on the TV and put on a movie, a comedy I had seen 1,000 times. I wanted to distract myself, clear my mind, and forget, even if only for a while, everything that was happening. I wrapped myself in a blanket and settled on the couch. Little by little, the atmosphere began to feel more relaxed. The familiar scenes from the movie made me smile. I even let out a laugh. For a moment, everything started to feel normal again, until suddenly, something changed. Halfway through the movie, I felt a strange sensation, hard to describe. It was as if something didn't fit, as if the atmosphere in the house had subtly shifted. The air felt heavier, and my heart began to beat faster. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was nervous about being alone. But the feeling didn't go away. On the contrary, it grew stronger, until I had the clear impression that someone was watching me. I looked up and glanced around. Everything seemed in order. The doors closed, the windows secured, but the discomfort wouldn't leave. Then I heard it. A very soft sound, almost imperceptible. It was like a whisper, or a faint scraping, coming from beneath me. My breathing stopped. The sound was coming from under the couch. My whole body tensed up. I stayed completely still. trying to listen clearly. For a few seconds I thought maybe it was my imagination or the house settling, but then I heard it again. A slight movement, a living presence. I swallowed and, trembling, and leaned forward, gripping the blanket tightly. The space under the couch was dark. I strained my eyes, hoping to see nothing. But then my eyes adjusted to the dimness, and I saw it. There was movement. Something, or rather, someone, was hiding underneath. A scream caught in my throat as I jerked back, almost falling to the floor in my attempt to get away. My mind filled with questions. Who was there? How had they gotten in? Why were they hiding under the couch? I had no answers, and no time to look for them. I only knew I had to get out of there immediately. I sprang to my feet and ran toward the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I finally managed, opened the door, and ran out. Without looking back, without even worrying about leaving it open. I sprinted across the street to my neighbor's house, Mrs. Green, an older woman who lived alone. I pounded on her door over and over again, desperate. I felt my heart in my throat. After what felt like ages, the door opened. She appeared with a worried look on her face. "What is it, dear?" she asked, alarmed. "There's someone in my house," I shouted, unable to hold back the panic. Her eyes widened. She grabbed my arm and pulled me inside quickly, locking the door behind us. Immediately, she called the police. While we waited, she tried to calm me down, but I couldn't think clearly. The image of that body hidden under the couch kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't long before we heard sirens in the distance. The officers arrived and went into my house, checking every room with flashlights. I watched from Mrs. Green's window, holding my breath. But when they came back, the news was baffling. They didn't find anyone. The man had disappeared. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no trace at all that anyone had been there. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police assured me the house was safe, though confusion showed on their faces. They didn't understand how it could have happened. My parents arrived shortly after, just as the officers were leaving. They were horrified when they heard what had happened. My mother hugged me with tears in her eyes, while my father spoke with the officers, trying to find some logical explanation. But there wasn't one. There never was. That night I didn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow made me tremble. The image of the man under the couch stayed there, burned into my mind. Who was he? What did he want? How had he gotten in? No one ever knew, for a long time afterward. I couldn't stay home alone. Even today, years later, I still check every lock and every window twice before going to sleep. Because I learned something that night. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the ones you can see, but the ones you can't explain. Story 7. It was the year 2020 when I decided to take a break from my life. Work, routine, and the constant noise of the city had exhausted me. So I decided to spend a few days alone out in nature. I loaded my recreational vehicle with everything I needed and drove deep into the forest. The air was fresh, and the tall trees rose on both sides of the road, slowly moving their branches in the breeze. It was the perfect place to relax and clear my mind. The forest was calm. There were no other campers nearby, no signs of human activity. Just me, the trees, and the distant murmur of the wind. I found an ideal clearing to park, quiet, isolated, and surrounded by a natural wall of trunks and leaves. The sun was setting, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink. I lit a small campfire in front of the recreational vehicle, made something to eat, and sat down to enjoy the stillness of the place. The sound of the forest surrounded me, the whisper of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. That night seemed perfect. When the fire began to die down, I went back inside the vehicle. It was warm and cozy. A small bed, a table, a couple of chairs, and a lamp that gave off a soft light. I closed the curtains, secured the doors, and put on my pajamas. The forest sound stayed outside, replaced by a calm silence. I lay down, wrapped in a blanket, feeling safe behind the thick metal walls. That was when, shortly after midnight, I heard it. A soft tapping on the window next to my bed. The sound made me open my eyes instantly. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but I heard it again. A light, rhythmic knock, as if someone were tapping with their fingers. My heart started pounding. I sat up slowly, listening closely. Outside, the forest was completely silent. There was no wind, no leaves moving, no insects, only that tapping, insistent and soft. I tried to reason. Maybe it was a branch tapping the glass in the wind, or maybe an animal. But the air was still. I swallowed and got out of bed, moving carefully toward the window. With a trembling hand, I pulled the curtain back just a little to peek outside. There was nothing, only the trees standing still under the faint moonlight. I let out a breath, trying to laugh at my own fear. I must be paranoid, I thought. I closed the curtain again and went back to bed. It was hard to fall asleep. Every little sound made me open my eyes. Several minutes passed, maybe an hour, until I began to relax. And then I heard it again. The same tapping. And this time, it was accompanied by crying. It was a low sob, distant at first, but little by little it got closer, becoming clearer, more human. A muffled, sorrowful wail that chilled my blood. I sat up suddenly and was breathing fast. That wasn't an animal. It was a person crying. The sound became so close it seemed to come from right outside the recreational vehicle. My hands were shaking as I moved toward the window again. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. With a slow motion, I pulled the curtain open. What I saw froze me. Just a few steps from the window, under the moonlight, stood a tall, thin figure. It had long, dirty hair falling over its face. Its silhouette was dark, almost blending into the forest. But its eyes were two huge, glowing white orbs, shining in the darkness and fixed on me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched me. The crying was coming from there, from that figure. A soft, deep sound full of a pain impossible to describe. I stumbled back with a strangled cry, tripping against the bed. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Was it a person? A spirit? Something else? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. The being remained still, as if it were enjoying the terror it caused me. Its body didn't move, but its eyes followed my every motion. Panic gave me strength. I lunged toward the driver's seat, hands shaking, searching for the keys. My fingers felt like stone, unable to turn the metal. Finally, the engine roared. Without looking back, I slammed on the accelerator with all my strength. The recreational vehicle jolted forward, kicking up dust and stones. The headlights lit the winding path between the trees. The forest seemed to close in around me as I sped away, my heart racing out of control. I didn't stop. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just drove. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin out. The open road appeared ahead of me, and the forest darkness was left behind. I drove until I reached a small town several miles away. I pulled up next to a gas station, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The silence inside the vehicle was absolute. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a hallucination caused by exhaustion, but I couldn't forget those eyes, so white, so fixed, so inhuman. That stare stayed burned into my mind. I never went back to that forest. I never camped alone again. And even today, when the night is very quiet and the wind hits my window, sometimes I think I hear that soft tapping, followed by the distant echo of crying. And then I remember those eyes staring at me through the glass, and I can only think one thing. I hope I never see them again. Story 8. I have always considered myself a practical man. I grew up in the city, surrounded by noise, traffic, and people everywhere. That's why, when I decided to buy a country house in a rural area, everyone was surprised. The idea of living in a quiet place, far from the hustle and stress of urban life, seemed perfect to me. I wanted to escape the chaos and enjoy a simple life. The house was old, but it had character. It was located on a large property, surrounded by tall trees that stood like silent guardians. The nearest neighbor lived several miles away, and at night the only sounds were the wind whistling through the branches and the distant hoot of an owl. The first few weeks were peaceful. I spent my days restoring the house, painting walls, repairing the roof, and cleaning the yard that had been neglected for years. There was something satisfying about working with my hands, about seeing the results of my effort. In the evenings I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills, while the countryside turned shades of orange and gold. It was a peace I had never known, until things began to change. At first, I blamed it on the age of the house. Old buildings make noises, I kept telling myself. They creak and shift when the air changes or the wood settles. But soon I realized that what was happening wasn't normal. It all started with small details. I would leave a tool in one room and later find it in another. Sometimes I heard footsteps upstairs, even though I knew perfectly well I was alone. They were soft steps, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I would go up immediately, looking for an explanation. But as soon as I reached the top of the stairs, the sound stopped, as if whatever it was didn't want to be discovered. One night, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, something happened that left me frozen. Since the house didn't have hot water, I had to heat it on the stove and use a basin. I was focused on my task when I heard a whisper behind me. It was so faint that I thought I had imagined it. I turned around, expecting to see someone, but the kitchen was empty. Then it happened again. Clearer, closer, right next to my ear. A shiver ran through my body. I dropped the plate I was holding, and it shattered on the floor. I stood still with my heart pounding, looking around. The whisper was gone. Only the sound of the wind hitting the window glass remained. I tried to convince myself I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew I wasn't alone. There was something in that house, something I couldn't see. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every faint sound made me jolt. The darkness felt thicker, as if the very air were filled with something invisible and oppressive. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, my ears tuned to any noise. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I jolted awake when I felt something cold brush against my arm. I sat up immediately, but there was no one there. The silence was absolute. The next morning I tried to act normal. I wasn't going to let fear control me. I kept working as usual, fixing things and avoiding thinking about what had happened. But when evening came, the uneasy feeling returned, stronger than before. The silence in the house felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls were watching me. I tried to go to bed early, hoping sleep would help me forget. But sleep didn't come. As I lay in bed, watching the shadows cast on the ceiling, I heard it again. The whisper. This time, clearer. It was a voice, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. It came from everywhere and nowhere. I sat up, my heart racing. The whisper was still there, insistent, almost desperate, as if it wanted to tell me something. I got up, trembling, and walked slowly down the hallway. As I moved forward, the voice seemed to follow me, filling the air around me. It led me to the main living room. I stopped at the threshold. The room was almost dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through a window. And there, in the middle of the room, there was a figure. It was a shadow, black, denser than the darkness around it. It had no face, but I felt its eyes fixed on me. I stood motionless, holding my breath. The whisper grew stronger, vibrating, emanating from that figure. It wasn't a human sound. It was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if fear had nailed me to the floor. The whisper grew, more and more insistent, almost pleading. I couldn't understand the words, but the feeling was clear. It didn't want me there. Finally, I managed to back away, step by step, without taking my eyes off that shadow. The sound weakened as I moved down the hallway. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the bed, unable to stop trembling. I spent the rest of the night awake, waiting, but the house remained silent. A heavy, ominous silence, like the calm before a storm. At dawn, I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I packed a few things, got in the car, and left without looking back. I sold the house a few weeks later, without ever setting foot inside again. I never told the new owners what I had experienced. Who would believe me? Even I still doubt what I saw. The only thing I know for sure is that something was in that house. Something invisible, unknown, and it definitely didn't want me there.